Morning. Today we're going to be discussing seafood demand in the United States, seafood supply in the United States, which of course follows. We're going to be looking to answer a couple questions today. Hopefully we can create some thought-provoking discussion. The questions we're looking to answer are if it is possible for the United States to be a completely self-sustaining fishery in terms of meeting our own demand. Basically, can we just eat what we as a country produce on our own? Are we eating American caught fish as efficiently as we can? It is important to understand where our food comes from. We are going to try to answer some of these questions today, and we are only focusing on wild caught fish. We are not including aquaculture in this discussion, at least not domestic aquaculture. We will also not be speaking about how COVID-19 has had an effect on the industry, which has been an incredibly detrimental effect. So yeah, let's begin. So before we understand supply and demand, we need to understand what our capabilities are as a nation. The United States has very impressive domain in terms of fishable waters. We have access to two oceans, the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, all bountiful, lively oceans and bodies of water with diverse coastlines, species, and easy accessibility. And that is not even considering the freshwater ecosystems that we have in estuaries like the Chesapeake Bay. According to the United Nations, we are the fourth largest seafood producing country, only under the countries that we import actual seafood from. This includes China, Norway, and Vietnam in that order. According to the United Nations, we are the number one producing developed nation of seafood. The pollock industry is a great example of a large American fishery. In fact, it represents 40% of the entire global whitefish trade. So whitefish refers to that flaky white meat that we see so often in fish markets. Take a look to the right. This gentleman is sampling a pollock catch. The pollock industry gives us the vast majority of fish sticks, fillet of fish, and imitation crab. So there's a pretty good chance that you've eaten pollock probably in this past year, probably in this past month if you've had fish. It makes up $1.9 billion of U.S. seafood exports. So it's an incredibly strong fishery for us. Globally, it is the second largest fishery, only to the Peruvian anchovy industry in actual volume. At a 99% catch rate, this is a very efficient fishery. It is important to note, however, sadly, that the less than 1% of bycatch caught in the pollock fishery negatively impacts the salmon industry, our domestic salmon production industry, where wild-caught salmon feeds many Alaskans and indigenous people. And it also helps them create income. More on pollock later. Here's a visualization of the United States exclusive economic zone. With the exception of a handful of marine sanctuaries and no-take zones, these waters represent the domain of U.S. fishing power and potential. We even have access, if you look at the top, to the top of the Arctic Circle, where cold, nutrients, and upwelling creates a very productive fishery. Alaska alone dominates the domestic U.S. fisheries market and is incredibly productive. As you can see down here, our territories in the Western Pacific give us access to large schools of tuna and other migratory species. The United States has an enormous market space for seafood as well. We are the second largest consumer globally, and first according to some other sources. Note the differences in regional productivity, especially on the West Coast, in regards to commercial fishing. In addition, we see the Gulf of Mexico is a far more important recreational fishery than it is commercially. Domestic tourism normally dominates this market. If you're going to go on a trip to Florida, it's likely that you'll probably go fishing while you're down there. In 2018, the United States landed 5.5 million tons of live wild fish. It's also important to notice that on the right side, if you look at the highest value species groups, shrimp, of which we eat the most of, is actually the lowest produced item on that list. You can see down here the difference, 3% of recreational fishing trips and 2% of the catch on the West Coast. But in terms of commercial value, we have 12% of the landings and 13% of the value, just split among these three states. Alaska completely dominates this with 58% of the landings and 32% of the value, and almost zero recreational value. So What are we importing? So what's coming in? 90% of consumed seafood is frequently touted by the government and documentaries as the annual quantity consumed by Americans. Though we still hold the top spot in terms of leading seafood imports, this is where we need to be careful with facts and statistics. Frequently, we hear about the 90% imported seafood, but we need to remember that an import does not mean the fish itself is foreign or that it was caught in waters outside the United States. NOAA's website talks about the 90% number, and it is even Google's answer at the top of the search page. You ask what U.S. fisheries imports look like. It is even frequently cited by government officials in Congress and in the federal government over several administrations. The United Nations puts us at even less, a more realistic number in some people's eyes, at 70% imported consumption. In reality, a study in 2019 showed that the number is closer to 65%. The reason for the variance in these numbers is that what isn't being taken into account is the amount of seafood, and this is not limited to finfish, this includes shellfish and shrimp, that is being caught by American fleets, shipped back to China, processed there, and then repackaged and sold back to U.S. markets, which is then considered, yes, that's right, a Chinese product. The picture to the right is from a USDA article on this. Note that this article, in addition to the one that I've just cited about the 65% rule, is an opinion piece and is not guaranteed government fact. Basically, it's an opinion piece. So you can see on the picture to the right, we have packaged Pacific cod. This cod was collected most likely in Alaska and then packaged, actually freeze-dried, sent to China, packaged in China, and then sold back in the United States. And as you can see on the bottom right, it's wild caught and a product of China. China's involvement in the U.S. fishing industry is immense. China exports a staggering $14.1 billion, the majority of that, the packing industry, yearly to the United States. Additionally, they have increased their aquaculture capabilities exponentially in the last decade. But that is beyond the scope of this presentation. This picture is just crazy to me. What is that fish doing in a U.S. marketplace after it's been packaged in China? Why can't we remove the middleman and just sell directly to our own markets without having to go and to have cheap packaging in China? Second on the list of imported countries is Norway. Norway has had a robust salmon boom in the past decade, much to the chagrin of environmentalists and fish purists. Additionally, they have had numerous issues with enclosure escapes and sea lice, but their salmon production is still extremely dominant. A friendly moniker, salmon from Norway are often called North Atlantic salmon. It gives the East Coast consumer a sense of ease when they're purchasing the product. North Atlantic salmon can come from anywhere from New York, New England to Nova Scotia. In actuality, it's coming from these fjords in Norway, where cold, nutrient-rich water travels through these farms. Rather, these pens, which are small enclosures where the salmon live their entire existence until they're harvested. America definitely has a shrimp problem. Southeast Asia feeds much of America's shrimp addiction. This is sadly to the detriment of mangrove ecosystems in Vietnam and Thailand, whose people have to bear the majority of this labor. Subsistence fishing becomes incredibly difficult for these people, and the cost of labor is extremely cheap. Our ability to supply our own demand for shrimp does not suffice. Gulf shrimp does not even compare to the amount of shrimp that we buy from Vietnam and Thailand. And it's decimated their ecosystems and ability to fish for themselves. I got tired of Googling these answers and instead decided to go down to DC's fish market, a prized location of rich history and, in fact, the country's oldest fish market. It's just a short walk from my apartment, so I took my camera and my wallet and went down there to see what the wholesale marketplace looks like right now. Getting human interaction in this research confirmed what I had seen online and from NOAA reports as well, and UN reports. As you can see here under the American flag, these fish, with the exception of the bronzini right here, a Mediterranean fish, are all American products. But this was far to the left, and there was far less people purchasing these fish than there were purchasing exotic species and shrimp, of course. I went over to another stand and asked the gentleman if I could take a picture. He was very proud to show me this octopus that he'd picked up. I quickly asked where he had gotten it from, or where the fish was, or where that octopus had come from. His boss told him it was from South America. Actually, Spain rather, and that the squid was from South America. Which was nice to see was the amount of shellfish that were actually local. You can see middleneck, chincoteague, and blue point all corresponding to each of these shellfish kinds. So it shows that the United States and the mid-Atlantic at least has a robust shellfish market. At the other end of this very same stand, I saw most of the domestic fish for sale, wholesale, not filleted like the exotic fish in the center were, like aquaculture raised salmon, and other species. But as you can see here, directly under this man, we're going back to the Alaskan pollock, or whiting as it was called, for $5 a pound. These fish were not filleted, but were actually being sold whole. To the right, we also see hybrid striped bass, which were likely to be farm raised because hybrid bass do not exist in the wild unless they're stocked. Further to the right, we see mackerel, a very oily fish and more often used for shark bait than for table fare. Sadly, this shark right here is actually a dog fish with its fins cut off and gutted. These are often the byproduct of bycatch for larger fisheries, being sold at the end for only $5 a pound. I asked this gentleman here which kind of shrimp he had sold the most of. He said the colored shrimp, the brown colored shrimp, are mostly exotic. With the exception here, these Carolina shrimp, the exotic shrimp far outsold the domestic shrimp. You can see jumbo tiger shrimp, they're from Southeast Asia. These head-on shrimp down here are also from Southeast Asia. The majority of what they sold were prawns and large exotic shrimp. You can even see here the salmon. The majority of the salmon is this lighter pink color. This is the North Atlantic salmon that was coming from Norway. Even these salmon steaks are the same. This portion right here is actually wild-caught Alaskan salmon. And it's, as you can see, more expensive than the farmed salmon. Right here we have mostly American catch. So on the bottom right, we have American shad, which once used to number in the billions. They're an extremely important forage fish for domestic species. Here's more of our pollock and whiting, which is an interchangeable name. There's bluefish, back to the Spanish mackerel, and then mullet, which are another important forage fish. These were all important American fish throughout our history and helped feed the amount of the people that ended up settling in the United States on the East Coast. So what is our conclusion here? I've given you a lot of information. Now we can use the power of choice to influence American markets and how we actually eat fish. If you grew up on the East Coast, probably these fish here are very recognizable to you. These are common fish in the Chesapeake Bay, and we eat a lot of them. USDA guidelines said in 2010 that we needed to double our intake of seafood to improve health. Our population is growing fast, and so is our demand, but we're still wasting so much fish. From 2009 to 2013 alone, 40 to 47% of seafood went uneaten. What's worse is this waste happened directly at the consumer level. So we have an incredible demand for fish, growing population, a packaging dependence on China, a shrimp addiction, and a healthy or mutant salmon from Norway problem. What do we do to make American fisheries the real winner? I confirmed so much of the research I had found online. Shrimp are popular, farm-raised shrimp is exotic and tasty, until you tell the consumer what they're actually eating. Consumers would much rather prefer local and fresh food. But that is not what is marketed to them. We have everything we need right here on our shores. My challenge to you, as an American who enjoys seafood and fishing, is for you to consume only fish from your coastline for the rest of this year. Maybe you'll even take it upon yourself to harvest these fish on your own. We, as consumers, citizens rather, have the choice to allow American fisheries to take pride in what we catch and market right here on our shores. I hope I've given you enough information to make decisions on your own, and I hope that you can get out this summer and get involved in your local food web and harvest these fish for yourself. Thank you very much. Tight lines.